So have people been reacclimating to the cold weather? Got that little sneak attack of warm weather for a bit. All the flowers popped out. I went for a run the other day, and there was a broken limb on a cherry tree, and there were some buds on it. So I was like, oh, if I grab it and I put it in some water, will the buds come out? And they're coming out. They're still coming. It's totally incredible. But I'm going to give them, I'm house sitting right now, and I'm going to leave them there as a little surprise, so I don't know if I'll get to see them flower all the way. I'll have to have them send me a text or something, see if they keep coming. Is that a thing that people know? Is that like kind of obvious to many other human beings? Okay, I'm getting some nods, yeah. Cool, well nature can do that. That's surprising to me. So. All right, well we'll get started, and I think I'll go through a review and then maybe open it up for questions. And so I apologize if the review is, frustrating or boring to you. It feels like every class it's like, okay, here's where we started. We added a step, we added another step, we added another step, you laid the base of the pyramid. And so I'm going to put you through that. And it's good, the more we use these terms and the more we build on them, the more actually I think it's interesting as we lay a new layer on top, the layer on top helps you readjust stones on the very bottom. So I'd be watching that in your own understanding and be like, oh yeah, no self, impermanence. I got it, locked down, right? Actually, if you got it, you'd be a Buddha, right? If you got it, you'd be a Buddha. So watch as something seems to build on top of it, the ground underneath it will shift and shake a little bit, or the stones will move around a bit. So really be watching for that. And that's why, we always call this class foundational teachings, not basic teachings. Foundational teachings. It's foundational Buddhism. So, starting at the top or the bottom, we have no self and impermanence, anicca and anatta. So, universal law like gravity, it affects everything, that there's nothing that'll stay put, either kind of as itself internally in a state or over time. Everything is moving about. And living beings, when facing this anicca and anatta, oftentimes experience dukkha. There's a suffering that comes along with that. And it's insubstantiality that's deeply frustrating and unnerving and anxiety-inducing. And we spent a lot of time looking at how that manifests as the 6 realms of existence. And those are kinds of dukkha-ing. Those are ways we manage this anxiety and this suffering. So the Buddha said to have woken up, and taught the 4 noble truths, that this suffering, that this dukkha, it has a cause. And there's such a thing as the cessation of dukkha, nibbana, the extinguishing of a flame, and that also has a cause, right? And we talked about how those are cyclical, those are relationships with each other, and that was the way that doctors in India at that time would diagnose an illness. So symptom, cause, cure, cause, right? And if we look at that, so we have the cause of cessation being path, and the driving bones or the engine that can make all that work is this term called kama or karma. So right, they can have this interrelationship because there is some cause and effect, and that's exactly what that word karma means. Cause and effect, or sort of more directly, action. And again, over within Buddhist traditions, and probably between one Buddhist teacher and another, and over the wide ecosystem of Hindu religions, there are widely different understandings of karma and how it works. But the vital question centering on what is the fulcrum of agency in a human life? And Buddhism gives the answer. Well, actually, I guess all schools of understandings of karma probably give a similar answer of intention and choice or volition. So that unique layer of experience. And we talked about the 4 kinds, that there's akusala, or dark karma, sometimes we'll just say shorthand bad karma, and good karma, kusala, light karma, or bright, I think is the actual translation, or the closest literal translation, bright karma. And that actually almost all of the karma that is cultivated in our beings is mixed. So it has lots of flavors of both. In fact, you might even in your own embodied state do something that you know is full of this kind of dark karma, but it's also acting as an antidote to some kind of addiction in the light karma you have. So there are these very weird loops of investigation that living beings have to go through to discover the kind of depths of their intention. And the last kind, or the 4th kind of karma, is the karma that ends karma. So this is volition in accord with the truth of no self and impermanence. Right. So we didn't talk much about that. Hopefully we'll be unpacking that in the next 2 classes. So that driving energy of karma that's so central to the 4 Noble Truths also gives rise to how path functions. And we touched briefly upon the Eightfold Path, which was how the Buddha introduced the idea of path to his followers and how it was taught. And we sort of did a little shift there and said, we're going to talk about the 6 perfections. So at some time over the history of Buddhism, through our lineage, that became the shift in the dominant paradigm. And then we looked at this. I'll do the great reveal. Whoa. Look at this beautiful graph, which I even augmented a little bit for this class. We have the 6 perfections, which have all these kinds of relationships going on within them. So the first of them is linear. You can see the little numbers next to them. I don't know how well everyone can see. Can people online see okay? I don't know if Joichi could zoom in on it or something. People okay? Thumbs up? Okay, got a thumbs up. So linear. Generosity is first, then ethics, patience or forbearance, and energy. Vigor is commonly translated for energy. And the last 2 being concentration and wisdom. So that's kind of the least interesting. It's sort of obvious that those don't just happen step by step. And then one that I really enjoy thinking about this and visioning this is these kind of reciprocal dyads that are here. So I drew these little arrows that weren't there before. But that rather than thinking about generosity and ethics maybe as separate things, I think it can be really helpful to think of that as kind of one layer of exploration. That ethical living and generosity are kind of the same stuff. And the same thing with patience and vigor. So forbearing difficulty and cultivating steady energy that can last through all parts of your day and of your life are really integral to each other. And then lastly, that concentration practices, so doing some sort of contemplation of body and mind and phenomena, are integral to discovering wisdom. And that wisdom will in turn refine concentration practices. So there are these realms of encounter. And we usually, probably in the fall, I think, there's almost always a class on the 6 perfections that someone from Buddha Eye will teach. So look out for that after the summertime. Another one of the layers in path, or in this formation of the 6 perfections, is the processing of deepening that happens here, or the becoming, each layer becoming more subtle. And that's here with the concentration and wisdom practices. That as you develop more, these concentration and wisdom practices bring us in to more subtleties that, for example, really illuminate mixed karma that we might experience. That you might have an experience of having been generous, and then you sit down quietly for 20 minutes, and you're like, there's all sorts of confusion in my belly. Did that have good results in another person's heart? You know, you have a nice extra sweet conversation with someone at work, or you're pretty sure has a crush on you, but you really are not interested. and you were like, oh, I was being nice, I was just being friendly. But actually, maybe it was tremendously unskillful and challenging for that person. So, it's hard to say, but there are all these layers, right, where all of our actions just matter deeply in unfathomable ways. But actually, you can start to fathom them further. And these concentration and wisdom practices, they help us do that. So they deepen our understanding through each one of these nodes of practice. And lastly, that each of these sort of infinitely deepens itself. They all, penetrate to the core of wisdom. So we don't need to just say that wisdom will help you figure something out, but as you engage each one of these practices, they have a kind of standalone authenticity and are gateways to the other shore, right? That word perfection also translates to, crossing over. So these are each, we can see them as a raft going from hate, ignorance, and greed over to wisdom and enlightenment. So I think that's about what we covered last class, and sort of opened up some juicy conversation, I thought, and questions. Does anyone feel shaken now to ask any questions or anything that's been jumbling around for people this past week? Good, all settled. Okay, well this is probably best. We have a lot we can get into tonight. So I want to offer one more image of path. And this comes from Thanissaro Bhikkhu. I'll actually do quite a bit of reading something he has to say on the subject. It's called A Gradual Training. I think offering this will really round out a conception of what path can look like in Buddhism, as we've sort of felt into a number of different ways of thinking about this. So I'll go ahead and just start reading into this and stop at various times. The Dharma, the truth taught by the Buddha, is uncovered gradually through sustained practice. The Buddha made clear many times that awakening does not occur like a bolt out of the blue to the untrained and unprepared mind. Rather, it culminates a long journey of many stages. And this is a quote. Just as the ocean has a gradual shelf, a gradual slope, a gradual inclination, with a sudden drop-off only after a long stretch, in the same way, this doctrine and discipline has a gradual training, a gradual performance, a gradual progression, with a penetration to gnosis only after a long stretch. That word gnosis, which I looked up before class, means knowledge of spiritual mysteries. So the kind of total penetration that only happens after a long stretch. The Buddha's teachings are infused with this notion of gradual development. His method of gradual instruction, which appears in various forms in countless sutras, always follows the same arc. He guides newcomers from first principles through progressively more advanced teachings, all the way to the fulfillment of the Four Noble Truths and the full realization of nirvana. At each stage of this gradual training, the practitioner discovers a new and important dimension of the law of cause and effect, karma, the cornerstone of right view. It is thus a very useful organizing framework with which to view the entirety of the Buddha's teachings. The gradual training begins with the practice of generosity. Number 1, which helps begin the long process of weakening the unawakened practitioner's habitual tendencies to cling, to views, to sensuality, and to unskillful modes of thought and behavior. This is followed by the development of virtue, or ethics. The basic level of sense restraint that helps the practitioner develop a healthy and trustworthy sense of self. The peace of mind born from this level of self-respect provides the foundation for all further progress along the path. The practitioner now understands that some kinds of happiness are deeper and more dependable than anything that sense gratification can ever provide. The happiness born of generosity and virtue can even lead to the rebirth in heaven, either literal or metaphorical. But eventually the practitioner begins to recognize the intrinsic drawbacks of even this kind of happiness. As good as rebirth and wholesome states may be, the happiness it brings is not a true and lasting one, for it relies on conditions over which he or she ultimately has no control. This marks a crucial turning point in the training, when the practitioner begins to grasp that true happiness will never be found in the realm of the physical and sensual world. The only possible route to an unconditioned happiness lies in renunciation, in turning away from the sensual realm by trading the familiar, lower forms of happiness for something far more rewarding and noble. Now, at last, the practitioner is ripe to receive the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, which spell out the course of mental training required to realize the highest happiness, nirvana. Many Westerners first encounter the Buddha's teachings on meditation retreats, which typically begin with instructions in how to develop the skillful qualities of right mindfulness and right concentration. So, right, these guys. It is worth noting that, as important as these qualities are, the Buddha placed them towards the very end of his gradual course of training. The meaning is clear. To reap the most benefit from meditation practice, to bring to full maturity all the qualities needed for awakening, the fundamental groundwork must not be overlooked. There's no shortcutting this process. All right, a few interesting points there. Have people heard that before in Buddhism? In Zen does not tend to emphasize this at all. That there's a sense that you should feel good through practice and being kind. That really, this is something we should endeavor for. And in fact, in some of our sutras, it's common to read and wish upon various beings, may you enjoy rebirth in the heavenly realms. Like, please get to experience the joy of that. And then when that experience runs out and you realize that even that cannot last, oh, will you please become a Buddha? And then will you please teach us? So this is one route of practice. Does that feel surprising to anyone? And so often the sensuousness is downplayed directly, right? Don't seek out a nest in feeling good. Just totally, zen through it, right? But this is much more like hang out in generosity and ethics and like have a beautiful neighborhood where you share eggs with your neighbors and raise children and have awesome birthday parties. That's kind of the flavor I get from that, right? Enjoy it, like go to Market of Choice and get their lemon poppy seed cake, right? And really enjoy that and give some pieces away. And what a beautiful life can come from this. So not eschewing simple, beautiful living. But there's a point where that will run out, that we'll notice that baked into those ways of living will be certain kinds of frustrations and anxiousness. And then actually we'll find that maybe we don't have the money to go to Market of Choice or Sweet Life to buy the cake anymore. And we'll realize how dependent we were on that kind of external gratification or even the willingness to share. I know that's something for me. Becoming the shape of a monk is really challenging, that I wasn't quite expecting, but to give up much relationship with having excess monetary funds, that your ability to give in a certain way is deliberately cut off. It's deliberately sort of hampered so that you don't get exactly the kind of good hit of making offerings in that way. So another kind of sort of spiritual alchemy and exploration happens for people who take up that kind of training. But I think we all know this, that we can have an intrinsic gut reaction just to give something, and we know how that feels good. And yet, oftentimes, another kind of concentration and connection with a person is what's really called for in the situation.
A question about renunciation. It mentioned in this text, and you said something slightly different, but that it's you sort of are required to replace one kind of enjoyment with like a higher, more virtuous kind, which seems to imply that like once you have sort of, expended this type of virtue and it no longer is fulfilling, that you should not do it anymore. But I see, especially here in the temple where, like, I talking to Joichi, I'm learning, like, it doesn't seem like it's necessary to forego all of these more base levels. Like, they can still be there, they don't have to be replaced. Is that true? And I'm asking specifically as, like, because I'm sober now and I didn't used to be. So that was like I had to replace that. Like, that was a definitive end and beginning. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on that, and like if it can be built upon, like if you have to get rid of things or.
Totally. I think, really astute point that, right, being kind isn't just cut off at some point. I think there's some discussion about what happens within if someone's hanging out in these practices more, and energetic and patient practices that, let's say in talking about generosity or basic kindness, that I would say there's less evaluation that will tend to happen and more presencing of your body. So this is just an image I offer here. When you do give yourself the pat on the back of like, that was a nice thing to do, that went really well, and you might sort of linger there for quite some time. I think that in a way can be, you're hanging out and you're grasping within the heavenly realms. There's a little bit of like, right? There's just like kind of feeling into it. Oh, wasn't that good? And I feel so nice. And now I just want to go for a walk and sit in the sun. Like there's some reliance on that happens versus I would say a mind that is more mind and heart and body that's more trained to be reflecting and attentive in the exact world around them. And so there's a oh, that was good. Body, birds. What else is there to attend to? Right? There can be like a crisp moving on. So I think, I don't know, that's a little bit in the weeds for what you're talking about, but I think that's part of the pivot that can happen for someone. And also, I think it's really interesting, forbearing difficulty and vigor, concentration and wisdom. I'm always thinking about what is real generosity in interpersonal relationships and ethics, and where are we constantly feeling our sense of responsibility to other beings. And it's so simple just to have a narrow idea of what that looks like. And so we're like, I just be kind. But then there's a point where you're like, oh, actually, if I'm just kind all the time, I'm not authentic. Mm-hmm. And so I have to learn to not only forbear my own sense of having a slight depression in my day. So I'm feeling a little bit depressed. And I have to forbear the difficulty of acknowledging that to myself, but forbear the difficulty of exposing that to other people and being willing to, be vulnerable, but not make other people happy. That there's this new kind of flexibility and ability to move in the world that comes from this. So your sense of generosity in that situation looks totally different. And in a sense, it does look like you're no longer being kind to someone. It might even look like being selfish. So I think the complex lines that can be drawn when you start tweaking these dials in different ways get really interesting on what each one of them and how they end up expressing themselves in the world. Yeah, do you have any follow-up thoughts on that? Or anyone else, feel free to jump in on the conversation. Molly? Molly and then Indigo?
You go ahead.
It makes me question myself and what I do for a living. Because it's selfish. Because somebody explained to me, like I work with people with disabilities, and somebody explained to me that it's very selfish what we do. I'm like, interesting, selfish. Because you get to watch somebody do something that you're like supporting them to get to a goal. and it's like to see them build and go and do something amazing, like you're standing with them through all the trials and tribulations, all the times where they stumble. And then you are there to support them to help continue to keep going. And it's like, it's almost like this process of generosity showing up. There's lots of patience involved. You're sharing your wisdom of like what it is that you need to continue to keep going. But then they get to that point and then, you start again. But how much of it is like investing yourself into that other person, and like, what if they don't succeed? Or what if they stop and you're wanting to continue? And this is the process of life, but it's like, this is feeling very like resonance, like me questioning like, wow, what is my purpose doing that? Mm-hmm. And how much of it is like, for me, self-serving versus them?
Yeah. It makes sense that what's coming to me in there is one of the earlier pieces I offered was called Selves and Not Self by Tanisaru Bhikkhu, and talking about no self rather as skillful self-identification. And so how is it when we're working with someone like that actually I think it's so skillful to say, like, you and me, let's go, like one step. And that the joy we receive from that is true and helpful. And but then to become razor sharp about where that is actually helpful for someone and where it's imposing your own image of what feels good. Mm-hmm. So where does it become, come on, take the next step? And that's because you actually think it's helpful for them, or it's for your own gratification. And right, I think the only way to really learn that is to make lots of mistakes and become more and more sensitive to that, and more aware of the subtle feedback you're getting from someone about where that might have been a skillful point to push a little bit. And actually, it might require having relationships that are strong enough where you can push and receive the feedback. That might end up being the thing you have to learn how to do because it produces better goals. And if you just ping off what the other person wants, might not be the most skillful thing. I mean, the intricacies in there are just endlessly challenging, I think. Yeah. I think at the temple, I noticed that always being kind to people when they come to the temple is a great rule of thumb. And then very quickly, I can appear I'm here to be your friend if you come in. Like, that's my goal, and that people might get that idea. And of course I want to be someone's friend, but I'm not also just in the business of being friends with people. So it's very, I think we all have those shapes in our lives. And do you have anything else to say there?
It's interesting to see how it shows up in everybody's life. And I think kindness is, it's being kind to others, but it's also being kind to yourself. And like having boundaries is a big aspect of that. You have to know where it is okay for you to show up for other people, but if it's taking too much out of your cup, then it's not being kind to anybody if you're kind of pouring from an empty cup. So that's where kindness is really important. But you have to be serving yourself, but there is no self.
Yeah. or maybe there are innumerable selves that need skillful pointing, and that kindness will appear sometimes as coldness. I think it's so challenging. And then if you don't have the power if you don't have the ability to forbear difficulty, or you find that you only get your energy from feel-good relationships, like you're not going to be able to do that next level of kindness that might really be skillful in that situation. Yeah. I feel so frustrated when people are like, well, I'm basically Buddhist, and all the religions, they're just about kindness anyway. And I'm just like, yes, and there's so much more there. And anywho, yeah. Thanks for sharing. Okay. And I do think one thing in this conversation is that because Zen communities, and maybe almost all Buddhist communities, are quite interested in this wisdom and concentration, it's hard to, I think, overstate how much we just need to hang out in giving, and having skillful ways that we can press into figuring out where our boundaries are and where are the places we can just either take one step beyond what we perceive as a boundary or one step more as a tightening of a boundary. So I think both are equally important right there. But where do we just develop a sense that I need to be in that realm constantly, and that the merit gained in that is so important and will inevitably, right, be sharpening your wisdom and be included in your wisdom. So I think so quickly we are very excited to jump to the supercharging place. And I think this is so important to spend time here, even if it's going on a mindful walk and learning how to be a little bit more attentive to your breath and your body. But just to be in this place is so, so important. I mean, the merit to become a Buddha is vast, what is needed to become a skillful and bright and beautiful human being. So all energies placed in those realms are super important. Yeah, Bill.
I have a clarifying question. The word Buddha versus like Bodhisattva. Because I remember encountering that word for the first time and being like struck over the head with like its profoundness of like, I saw a Buddha as more of a stereotypical like monk, like go into the mountains and find enlightenment, but a Bodhisattva is like, no, I'm chilling, like I literally can't go up until everybody goes up. So my work is right here. So I sort of see that as like doing deep goodness in the generosity and ethics realm, of just deeply understanding that there's like, there's systemic pain that needs to be addressed deeply now. I guess I wanted to clarify and inquire about that word and what that means.
So Bodhisattva literally translates to being of awakening, and basically there's kind of various doctrinal layers going on there about different schools and what are the images of awakening that are really important. And in fact, if you've been coming on Sundays at all, or I just gave a talk on the Lotus Sutra, and this is one of the central questions. The earlier ideas were about an arhat. So listen to the teachings of the Buddha, put them into action, and relieve suffering within your being, and then that helps the world. No doubt about it, but relieve the suffering that is carried through your own karma. That was the image of the arhat that was held as the center. And then there was an evolution of image and thought, and I think a kind of yearning that said, wait, what would it be like to become a Buddha? What did a Buddha have to give rise to in terms of their volition and heart and vow in order to dispense medicine to all beings? And so the idea of the Bodhisattva grew out of that and is the foundation of our lineage as it's called a Mahayana school, a great vehicle school. So there's often taken up as this idea as the Bodhisattva doesn't try to leave the world of suffering. And in a sense, we could think about that, like you said, this systemic problems in the world, not trying to leave that, but also as a general attitude towards the suffering of our own heart and mind, of our families. It doesn't have to be related just to that external level. And a Buddha, it would be a being that has totally woken up to the non-differentiation of samsara and nirvana. And no matter where the Buddha goes, seeing a living being, the very sight of a living being, no matter what hell they're in, they also view them completely connected to their Buddhahood. And they can even watch step by step what that being would need to unfold that Buddhahood through time. But a Buddha wouldn't be limited to time in that sense. So in this way, the Buddha, I don't think that image is typically paired with Buddhas of leaving the world. In fact, the Buddha Shakyamuni basically stayed just outside of town, and kings came and visited, and he got in the way of armies trying to go destroy his family, and was very involved in the world and his troublesome Sangha. And the Bodhisattva is the idea, I think, in a similar way, that to stay with the muck, And the lotus, right, has its roots in the mucky, dirty water and blooms above the water. And so both are necessary. Yeah. Does that get at your question?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So these 6 stages, just to outline what I just talked about, this gradual opening of awakening, generosity and ethics coming first. And I think that it's really interesting that sila coming after that generosity. Sila is the Pali, is it the Pali? Maybe Pali or Sanskrit word for virtue or ethics. To think about that is you start to live with the complexity that myself and others are totally equal in validity, and all the immense complexity that comes up with that. So after that, experiencing some good results, that life feels good when you can do that, and there are deep pleasures when you can give rise to that kind of sustained living. And that even that isn't enough. That something in there will still be an anxiousness and a yearning. There's a quote from the early sutras I read today that not even if it rained gold coins would we have our fill of sensual pleasures. No delight in even the heaven. Wise people would not delight even in heavenly sense pleasures. So it's really intense. And sort of want to bracket this conversation because we'll talk about it more next class. But what is, say, the difference between heavenly sense pleasures and sensual pleasures and joy? Right? I think almost all Buddhist discussions are walking this narrow line. They're like, don't desire things, but you must be joyful. Right? It's kind of confusing. Usually my sense and joy, or my sensual pleasuring and joy are pretty tangled for me. And they have a deep root, inevitably. And so to think of this sensual, when you may hear sensual pleasures, to think reliance on the outside. So a phenomena that comes or goes. If we tie ourselves to that and say, yes, I've got it. You are just right. You're sowing the seeds of I don't got it. And I'm sad about that, right? It was very simple in that way. So once realizing the drawbacks of heaven, giving rise to the sense that, okay, there's something else I have to do. There's something else that needs to be done. And that's where the word renunciation comes in. And then leading to the truth, the Four Noble Truths. Right? So my thought and volitional energy is completely vital and needs my full attention. And I need to plug in to realizing that every slight movement has an effect that I need to attend to. Okay. Let's go into talking about nirvana. Nirvana or nibbana. So I'm going to read a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh's book, The Other Shore. Many of you, or some of you, are in Kogan's class on Monday, and you're reading this together. This comes from the end of the book. The word nirvana means extinction. Nirvana is not a place you can go. Nirvana is not in the future. Nirvana is the nature of reality as it is. Nirvana is available in the here and now. You are already in nirvana. Imagine the wave rising on the surface of the ocean. The wave is made of water, but sometimes it forgets. A wave has a beginning and an end. It goes up and it goes down. It can be higher or lower than other waves, and more or less beautiful than other waves. If the wave is caught by these notions, beginning, ending, coming up, going down, more or less beautiful, it will suffer. But if the wave realizes it is water, it enjoys going up and going down. It enjoys being this wave, and it sees that at the same time it is all other waves. There's no discrimination no fear at all. The wave doesn't have to go anywhere to look for water in the present moment. The wave is already water. So we don't have to go and look for nirvana, because nirvana is our true nature. The nature of no beginning and no end, no birth and no death. And like the wave, if we are able to touch our true nature, then we transcend all fear, all anger, all despair, because our suffering is born from these notions: birth and death, being and non-being, coming and going, same and different. Nirvana is not the object of our searching, and we do not need to enter nirvana, because everything is in nirvana already. Our reality is the reality of no birth and no death. Our reality is the reality of no coming and no going. We are perfectly in nirvana. We have been nirvanized from the beginning. From the non-beginning. We have been nirvanized from the non-beginning. The late Thich Nhat Hanh. So, I drew a graphic that I'd like to play with. Ejo walked in when I finished drawing this, and he was like, "Don't you just wish you could draw better?" And he said, "Well, that's what I always think." For himself, yeah. People get the gist of it? Should we just call class there? Call it a... So, my thought here, beings that are, we have a being more or less in delusion up here. We have a being who's grown accustomed to sowing some good karma. We have a bodhisattva, and we have a Buddha. So the being in more or less suffering, they're really into the shape of the wave. The shape of the wave is what matters. And to me, that makes sense on being a little bit on the top of the wave. And, they're always, the wheel of rebirth that we're talking about, suffering and the wheel of samsara as life and death, that from when you're really concerned with the shape of your feelings or sensations or objects, there's a kind of distance that's built into there. And so the anxiety that courses with the loss of these objects of your sense, of your feeling, is large. So there's a kind of anxiety at like, oh wow, it's so far. I don't know when I'll feel this way again. Or if I lose, my special toy, I don't know if I'll ever be able to get it again. When a kid, Emma works in a daycare, and when a kid takes the toy away, right, it can be like the end of the world. That kid's world is totally wrapped up in that toy truck, and their friend has just taken it, and they're not their friend anymore. Being with good karma, who's sowing good karma, has sort of this sense that actually these waves seem to be interrelated, even if I can't quite see it. That somehow if I give something away, actually that affects me. It requires a certain kind of faith, a certain kind of challenge is wrapped up in that, but there's some kind of steadiness and something good comes from it when I'm patient and I just put up with things I don't like. I'm in the shape of a wave, that sucks, but that's okay. There's something that can happen with that, and I see that there's a kind of stillness, a kind of steadiness, a kind of breadth to my being that's possible. Now, the ideal of the bodhisattva here is endeavoring in one foot, I don't know if you can see, it's kind of buried in the water, that this water is underlying everything. And you can see the Buddha is kind of a full water being. And that rather being so curious about or so wrapped up and intent upon the shape of the wave, really curious about what is water? What's water? And now there's a tendency here where we can say, great, like I will get to the bottom of water. But actually, water is in each wave. The wave is revealing the endless possibilities of water. So to do any investigation of the depth of water, you also need to be at the height of each wave. Indigo, did that like shatter you? Are you still with? You're still hanging out? Does that make sense? That if you think you can just get to the depths of water and sort of get away from the world and be like, I'm just going to get over all my pettiness and get to the cool, calm state of pure consciousness, you will inevitably be sidetracking innumerable things. There will be a kind of heading off and pushing away difficulties rather than seeing through them to the nature of what's going on at the bottom. So the Bodhisattva is here hanging out in all these realms. And the Buddha is sort of pleasantly with a smirky little grin on his or her face, sitting there knowing that their full nature resides in the depths, and that the depths do not have any problem with the shallows and are totally willing to meet everything in the shallows. But to be able to meet skillfully in the shallows requires attendance and presencing of the depths. So to illustrate this further, that's really hard to talk about, especially with like the inside water business. It's sort of both represented by the nature of water, but also like the metaphor of depth here. And we're not even talking yet about all the beings that swim around in the depths. So I want to read just a few lines from chants or shastras, so famous poems written about the nature of awakening that we chant here on a daily basis. So these read the first part of verses of Faith Mind, which we do on Tuesday and Thursdays, if you ever want to come chant it. So verses of Faith Mind. The supreme way is not difficult if only you do not pick and choose. Neither love nor hate, and you will clearly understand. Be off by a hair, and you are as far from it as heaven from earth. If you want the way to appear, be neither for nor against, for and against opposing each other. This is the mind's dis-ease. Without recognizing the mysterious principle, it is useless to practice quietude. The way is perfect like great space, without lack, without excess. Because of grasping and rejecting, you cannot attain it. Do not pursue conditioned existence. Do not abide in acceptance of emptiness. In oneness and equality, confusion vanishes of itself. Stop activity and return to stillness, and that stillness will be even more active. Merely stagnating in duality, how can you recognize oneness? Return to the root and attain the principle. Pursue illumination, and you lose it. One moment of reversing the light is greater than the previous emptiness. There is no need to seek the real, just extinguish your views. There's no need to seek the real, just extinguish your views. So you can think about where we've sort of shifted in the discourse right now. This is a text written for spiritual seekers, likely other Zen monks of the time. And Sekito Kisen wrote that, I believe, one of the ancestors of our this lineage here at the temple. So it's talking about our tendency to be looking outside at the shape of waves to learn about the nature of water. We're always trying to use our faculties to say, what is the shape of the wave? And in that way, I will discover the nature of water. But rather, no need to seek the real. Just stop seeking outside. So you can see how this is the place of concentration and wisdom, of how if we're always pinging off of our conditioned existence, so what we think is good or bad, we will inevitably be falling off and trying to get to another wave. We're really trying just to get to another shape. Versus a practice of deep quieting, the mysterious principle of quietude. How is that unfolding this knowledge of a Buddha, this steadying? Let me read a couple of those lines again. For and against opposing each other, this is the mind's disease. Because of grasping and rejecting, you cannot attain it. Do not pursue conditioned existence. So give up on trying to see what you think will be the next right thing to do. And do not abide in acceptance of emptiness. So don't just shut off and turn everything off and think that if I just go numb, that's also the experience. Stop activity and return to stillness, and that stillness will be even more active. Stop activity and return to stillness, and that stillness will be even more active. So for me, where that really hits home is when I'm sitting down for meditation and my mind's going so fast. All these thoughts moving, this energy coursing through. And then I start to recede a little bit is what the feeling is. My pouring out, my leaning out, my gobbling up the world with my mind recedes a little bit. And then I start to hear the birds. I start to hear Lulu running around outside, the cars going by. Versus, I think there's so much activity happening when I'm thinking. But actually, really, I have a one-track mind. It's one track, and I've turned it up as loud as it can go, basically, and I don't hear anything else. So this is a place now highlighting in this version of path. And this is one way we can start to think about what is being sort of offered through the meditation practices of Buddhist tradition. Right? We have all the energy going towards living in the world and ethical living and being generous, watching all these other parts of our lives. And then where is this place of non-discrimination that we hear so much of? What is water? And how is it that when we start to feel into our willingness to stay with consciousness, however it appears, whether it's uncomfortable, unruly, bright, beautiful, and we just stay with it, that something different unfolds in our experiencing and our ability to stay with and move with difficult situations. And the title of what I was just reading is Verses of Faith Mind, or Verses of Faith in Mind. So one way we can think about the practice of meditation is as you sit down to literally just have faith in whatever is appearing. And we also might think about, we're talking about a wave as being an individual self. Now, if you imagine this little diagram, let's say it's now like a chessboard. So on one side we saw the waves going one direction. Now it's a chessboard. And imagine waves going in all directions. And somehow your little node of consciousness is one of those waves. And that's what we tend to call ourselves. The universe somehow gave rise to each of us as an individual human being. And we all have our own baggage. That's myself. And rather than getting free of that, we have to embody that fully. And therein lies the freedom of water. And we don't need to begrudge any shape of the wave that appears to us. Yeah. We don't need to keep any other waves out. That's a little bit of a simplistic notion, because we need boundaries, right? But for example, we know the boundaries, and we are willing immediately to show up where someone's crossed a boundary and to enter that discomfort without any hesitation, right? That might be a way that we embody our life fully. So yeah, I just sort of painted with many broad strokes right there. I wonder if anyone has any comments or thoughts. Ken?
How would you characterize a being who's in a boat on the water just following the waves? Within your model of
Yeah. Hard to say if they are a Buddha or an ignorant living being with that description.
Would that be like abiding in emptiness, maybe? Just letting the ocean do its thing to you?
It could be. Yeah. I mean, in one sense, it could be like, there's a very beautiful koan. A teacher asked a monk who was visiting, he said, "Did you come by boat or by land?" And then the monk said, I actually forget what he said, but I think he said by land. And then he left. And the teacher said, he had his student there. He said, "Do you think he was awake or not?" What could it mean to be a Buddha and a living being? Because we have to embody the fullness of our karma. And so this game of time becomes really important, but I like to think of us all as Buddhas to be. And if we anchor ourselves in the fullness of our karmic situation, maybe it'll look like floundering, but I think it might also be the carrying of a very heavy load of beings over to the shore of nirvana. Right? It's really hard to say. But if you want to use other language, because I think I made a clever poetic mess of your question. If you want to specify your question a bit more, I could respond.
No, I think I'll leave it there, but I'm also reminded, I haven't read the Lotus Sutra, but my understanding is that later, that there is a story or parable or something about the Buddha predicting when various people in his entourage will become Buddhas and what their names will be. And,
Yeah.
and so all these people are clamoring to find out, well, tell me when I'm going to be.
Yeah. And then he also gave a prediction to the person who tried to kill him, his cousin. So someone who was held up to be the most evil person of the Buddha's time, he gave a prediction. And it's kind of funny that I've been doing some reading about the history, and it seems like that chapter was added much later and sort of like dropped in the center. And it's maybe the most fantastical or mythical, one of them, most fantastical or mythical chapters. But it makes me happy to think someone was like, this doesn't go far enough. Like, it's just all the people in the Buddha's entourage, like boring. Like, let's put his nemesis and then also an 8-year-old dragon Naga girl. Depths. Someone, totally considered, I mean, basically without any power or agency in the time of the Buddha, a young 8-year-old girl, right? Almost like property is what many women were treated like, let alone a child. But to say that even this being, if they can enact an instant of Buddhahood. Anyway, I told that story much more fully in my last Dharma talk. But. Well, anyone else want to jump in there? You think we could fish for someone online? Okay, well, I have materials to hand out then. Just exciting. Brian, would you be willing to pass these out?
Sure.
Folks online, I'm sorry, I did not email this to you today, but I will do so later. It's the verse of atonement and the bodhisattva vow, if you have other ways to look them out. Did I give you the wrong one?
This one's not like the other one.
Oh, okay. Is that all of them?
Yeah, there was only like...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, bummer. We don't have them. So we will carry on. You can share. These are actually many of you, if you've been practicing here for a little bit, you know these. So the verse of atonement and the Bodhisattva vow, both we do on a Sunday. So my hope was just offering these and highlighting them after talking a little bit about nirvana and how our karma and how, be the right word, how all this comes together in practice is what I'm interested in talking about with these. So we have this verse here at the top, the verse of atonement. All my past and harmful karma, born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. So avow there meaning to declare openly or bluntly, to assert or confess freely. One way we could think of what it would mean to embody your own wave would be simply to do this. Stop yearning to be somewhere else. Stop trying to affect the change that you think will make you feel better. And so mostly, I don't know about many of you, but when we stop and we sit meditation, we're confronted with our own suffering and anxiousness very directly. There's sort of no gap. And as you're walking around the world, we kind of hide it in different plans or responding to things, but you sit down and face the wall, and boom, all my past and harmful karma appearing right here. And the very important word here, I'd say the most important word of this whole little stanza is beginningless greed, hate, and delusion. Born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion. So one way we could read that is like, I'm endlessly messed up. This has been going on for a long time. It's not news. The other way we can read it is if we are thinking about the whole ocean and all these innumerable waves sort of coming from various directions, various causes and conditions, and appearing at one point. It's not your fault. No matter what it is. It's really radical, the kind of grace that I think is offered here. And this is the fulcrum, I think, of Buddhist imagination and Buddhist heart, that on the one hand, I'm going to air it all out. I'm going to express it fully. I'm going to take full sight of it. I'm going to count all of my ancient harmful karma. And in the same movement, I'm going to acknowledge it's not actually mine. It's from beginnings I cannot trace. And yet it's here. And now it is my responsibility. I have the ability to respond to this harmful karma. Right? That word grace, I think, has such a beautiful presencing effect. And imagine that kind of heart animating your meditation. You know, in that sense, what is your task to do while sitting when you take that idea to heart? Is it to become the good shape? Is it to, use your breath? I will become calm. Or is something else happening there? All my past and harmful karma, born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion. The three poisons that turn at the center of the wheel. Through this body, speech, and mind, through my karma, right? Those are the three places of action within a human being. Body, speech, and mind. I now fully open and declare.
Seeing these two juxtaposed, it seems like the verses of atonement lead into the first two lines in particular of the Bodhisattva vows.
Yeah. Will you say more on that?
Also,
Yeah.
As individuals, we are atoning for our karma, which, as you said, is extending over large periods of time. But then we're also making this vow that we're going to then use that knowledge to help free other beings and to address the greed, hate, and delusion.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
to end the greeting.
Yeah, let's look at those more closely. So for those who don't have it in front of you, beings, the Bodhisattva vow, this person right here, they're vowing, they're raising their hand in oath. I actually didn't think that, they were just waving when I made it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. And also, so if we take that on in thinking about this wave analogy here, every time I experience a new phenomena, that's a new being present. And I vow to walk with them to liberation. Every time I clamp down on another shape of being, this is what awakening or what a better life will be like that, I vow to find the depth within that. Each new shape is a Dharma gate. It is the way that the water realizes its possibility. It can be like this. I vow to walk through that. And the nature of water being what waves are, I vow to realize that. So many people will read these and will say, oh, they're just impossible. And I don't see that. I see that they're a trajectory. They're a perspective. They're what this bodhisattva is saying when they're saying, I want to become like a Buddha. You know, I have 1 foot in the water right now. 1 foot in the water. But I want to color my whole being the color blue as I investigate and enter every part of the wave. And I think if a bodhisattva is saying this, I'd say from the perspective of faith and yearning, I would rewrite a Buddha is saying these as beings are one and their substance is freedom. Delusions are not separate from wisdom. Dharma gates are inherently bounded. I vow to realize that is not a hindrance. And living beings are exactly the shape of Buddha. And say maybe that's close to what a Buddha is seeing in the world. And a bodhisattva is aiming and taking sight and shooting off in that trajectory. So that's a very high philosophical note to end class on. Does anybody have a parting shot or two?
I'd always like to get a definition of a Dharma gate. Do you have a sense of what a Dharma gate means to you?
It's no different from a being in a delusion. For me. I don't know if there is a technical term anywhere, actually. There must be.
How do I enter it? That's the way I've always thought.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean, Ken?
I guess the closest I've come to defining it for myself is that moment to moment we have these opportunities to practice, I suppose. So like you were giving the examples earlier about skillful interactions with other people, and every one of those interactions is an opportunity to pass through a Dharma gate by being skillful and realizing, oh, I did that, I didn't do that part right, I could do that better next time.
Yeah, I would say totally. And I think that there's something for me that, I really like that phrasing. I think it's really clear, but it also tends to bring me into my head a little bit versus something gristier and more mysterious versus like, I'm sitting alone quietly. What does the Dharma gate look like then? When I'm like sleepy and feeling a little bit hazy in the morning, what does the Dharma gate feel like then? So to kind of unbound what a Dharma gate could be, I think maybe is one of actually our great challenges right there in realizing that they're boundless. So often I think I gotta be on my A game because I see this is important versus like the very fabric of every movement requires my deep attention. So for me, that's where it sort of throws me back and kind of makes me think about what does it even mean to be a living being and have consciousness. And
I also have this image that a Buddha has entered every possible of every one of these boundless Dharma gates.
Mhm.
And that's the big achievement of being a Buddha.
Yeah,
Even
totally.
the
I think
paradox
that's
that there's essentially an endless number of them, but a Buddha manages to do it anyway.
yeah. No, I think that's like a classic textbook understanding of Buddha. That they've lived they've encountered every form of the Dharma gate or boundary and know they're so firmly rooted in the nature of water that no wave will throw them off their understanding of water, like their total rootedness. They won't get caught in any shape or idea. Yeah. Good question. Okay, well that puts us at time. This is class 4 of 5. So last week, next week, come prepared for the big finale. And,
Big quiz, right?
big quiz, yeah. Passes and fails, gold stars, silver stars, bronze stars, rainbow stars. Okay, we'll close with the refuges.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.